How do you feel? Have you had time to reflect on everything? Yeti stood directly across from my husband, facing the man who had so easily cast me out of the house after swallowing his stepchild's lies without question. He looked at me from above, chin lifted, eyes cold with confidence, as though he already believed he'd won. That air of superiority made my chest tighten, until an unexpected laugh escaped me. Reflect? I said softly, almost amused. No, not even a little. I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly organized stack of papers. What I have done, I continued evenly, is make a decision. Please sign here. I placed the divorce papers and legal documents my attorney had prepared into his hands. He flipped through them calmly at first, his expression unreadable, signing page after page without hesitation. That confidence lasted only seconds. The moment his eyes landed on the additional documents clipped at the back, his face drained of color.
His hand froze mid-air, trembling just slightly. Beside him, his stepchild Jim stiffened. Panic flickered across his face.
The story they had so carefully fabricated, the lies whispered behind closed doors, had just collapsed under the weight of truth. Let me rewind for a moment. My name is Mary. I'm 52 years old and work a quiet office job. I had only been married for 1 year when everything fell apart. After the wedding, I moved into my husband's home, which he shared with his adult son, Jim. Though Jim worked full-time, he refused to move out of the house he had grown up in. I never legally adopted him, and emotionally, we were strangers from the beginning. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that he would eventually leave. But Jim had no intention of going anywhere. This is my mother's house, he told me firmly. One evening. She died 5 years ago, and I'm not leaving the place we shared. I understood grief. I had lost my first husband around the same time Jim lost his mother. But understanding didn't make living with Jim any easier. My cooking was often the first target. My mom was a much better cook, Jim muttered one night, poking at the food I'd spent hours preparing. But I guess I'll eat this. He didn't bother hiding his contempt. It chipped away at me day after day. Finally, exhausted, I went to my husband. Jim clearly doesn't like my cooking, I said carefully. What should I do? He shrugged. Then don't cook for him. He doesn't have to eat it. The indifference hurt, but I followed his advice. The next evening, Jim stormed in to find no plate waiting for him. Why isn't there food? He snapped. You married my dad. That means it's your responsibility to take care of me too. No matter what I did, I was wrong. Jim's remarks grew crueler, sharper, and my husband's refusal to intervene left me feeling completely alone. Before our marriage, my husband had promised Jim would move out soon. Yet nothing changed. He can't afford to live alone, my husband claimed, though I knew better. Jim had inherited a sizable estate from his mother and wasted much of it on luxury purchases. Credit card bills piled up in his room. I stopped mentioning it. There was no point. Jim wasn't just irresponsible, he was openly disrespectful. And my husband's silence only encouraged him. Eventually, I realized the man I married wasn't the steady partner I believed him to be. I confided in my daughter. Emma, maybe Jim just likes living at home, she suggested gently. But honestly, if I were him, I'd never impose on newlyweds like that. Her words were a wake-up call. I had tolerated far too much. Not long after, Emma called me with exciting news. She had been proposed to. For the first time in a long while, joy filled my chest. Congratulations, I told her. Your father would be smiling from heaven. Memories of my late husband flooded back. He had worried endlessly about Emma's future. I knew he would have been relieved to see her happy. Emma hesitated before adding, Do I have to introduce my fiancé to Brian? He's just your second husband. I didn't blame her discomfort. Just a brief greeting, I said softly. When I told Brian about Emma's engagement, he barely reacted. I wasn't surprised. He'd never shown much interest in her. Jim, however, seized the opportunity to be cruel. Why don't you just divorce Dad and move in with your daughter? He sneered. You probably hate living here anyway. I looked to Brian for support. As usual, he walked away. Later, the thought struck me, what if Jim married and stayed here too? The idea filled me with dread. Brian brushed it off completely. When I finally met Emma's fiancé, I saw everything my marriage lacked. He was responsible, kind, and independent, everything Jim wasn't. Seeing the contrast made my reality even harder to ignore. That night, when I returned home late, Jim greeted me with his usual venom. "A housekeeper shouldn't be this late," he complained. "Dad and I are starving." Brian pretended not to hear. As weeks passed, Brian began spending every weekend away. His excuses didn't add up. When I confronted him, his panic told me everything I needed to know. Jim delighted in my discomfort. "Dad probably regrets marrying an old woman like you," he taunted. "You'll get cheated on and kicked out." His words hurt, but they also pushed me to act. Emma eventually uncovered the truth. Brian was planning another wedding, while still married to me. Armed with evidence and supported by my daughter and her fiancé, finally found the strength to leave. Which brings me back to that moment standing across from him, papers in hand, watching his confidence crumble. And when I returned home that night, determined and calm, Jim greeted me the same way he always did. As usual, I started preparing dinner as usual. I was determined not to let him see my struggle once I had proof of Brian's affair. I would leave if Brian remarried. Jim would have to rely on his new stepmother, and he wouldn't be able to treat her the same way he treated me when Brian came home. I decided to test them. "Will you be attending our daughter's wedding? They're having it at a prestigious venue," I said, casually mentioning the name of the venue in the photo. Brian's face stiffened for a moment before he denied, knowing Theplis. His reaction confirmed my suspicions, but I decided not to press further for now. Then Brian changed the subject. "Jim hasn't asked you for money, has he? He's been struggling financially." I shook my head. Jim had never asked me for money. He didn't see me as anything more than a housekeeper and didn't expect help from me. He's been pestering me for money. Brian continued. Despite inheriting a large sum from his mother, he blew through it all. Now he's asking me for help. I thought about the debt collection notices I had found while cleaning Jim's room, but I didn't tell Brian. I couldn't bring myself to confide in a man who was likely cheating on me. Besides, I feared Jim's reaction. If found out I had seen them, he'd probably scream at me and tell me to stay out of his business. "Housekeeper, I haven't heard anything about that," I said instead. "Can't you talk to him about it? Tell him to stop wasting money." Brian pleaded. I was stunned. "Jim doesn't listen to me. He sees me as nothing but a housekeeper. You're his father. You should have talked to him." But Brian kept pushing. "Don't be so cold, please. I'm not good at dealing with tough conversations." His insistence only made me more disappointed in him. The next day, he continued to press me. "Have you talked to Jim about the money yet? What did he say when I told him I hadn't?" He grew angry. "Hot at. Are you doing? You need to talk to Jim about this right away." Fed up with this nagging, I resolved to focus on gathering evidence of his affair. Once I had it, I would finally be free of Brian and Jim. Reluctantly, I approached Jim. "Your father is worried about your spending." I began choosing my words carefully. "He asked me to remind you to be more careful with money." I tried to sound as non-confrontational as possible, but Jim exploded in anger. "Who do you think you are, housekeeper?" he sneered. "It's my money, and deal spend it however I want. It's none of your business." I could see why Brian had avoided this conversation. Jim was impossible to reason with. Still, I couldn't help but wish Brian as his father would handle this himself. It was becoming increasingly clear that Brian cared little for his son's issues and was entirely focused on his affair. Jim glared at me with hatred. "I'll get y'all kicked out of this house." Just wait. His words stung, but I reminded myself that once I had proof of Brian's infidelity, I would leave on my own terms. A few days later, Emma called me with the results of the investigation. "Mom, we have proof," she said firmly. "Can you meet Jack and me at a local restaurant?" My heart sank. Was it true? Did he really cheat on me? I asked. Emma's fury was evident. "Yes, it's true. He's been seeing a woman much younger than you. They're even looking for a new house together." Jack handed me the investigation report filled with undeniable countless photos of Brian with his mistress. "You need to divorce him right away," Jack advised. "This woman seems very suspicious. Has been spending extravagantly and might be seeing other men besides your husband. She could be planning to take his money and leave him hearing." This made me realize how deeply Brian had fallen for this woman's schemes. They had already visited a wedding venue and she might have taken money for wedding preparations and a new house. Jack's words gave me a sense of urgency. He needed to act quickly. After discussing the next steps with Emma and Jack, I returned home the investigation report in hand. When I arrived, I found Jim and Brian talking in the living room. Mary, come here, we need to talk. Brian called me over with a serious expression. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to confront him. Jim smirked as he glanced at me. You've been seeing a younger guy, haven't you? Dad saw you at a familiar restaurant with him today. Jim showed a blurry photo on his phone of me with Jack caught red-handed. How embarrassing, dating someone that the same age as your daughter. Jim was gloating, but I refused to let it affect me. That's Emma's fiancée, and she was with us at the restaurant, I said calmly, but Brian wouldn't listen. Jim caught you in the act. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Dad, kick her out, let them live together again like for. Jim urged. I agree with Jim, Brian said arrogantly. Leave this house, marry Betrayal with the divorce and money later. I could hardly believe his audacity. I felt like laughing at how clueless he was. All right, I said coolly, I'll leave. We can discuss the divorce and financial matters later. As I walked toward the door, Jim yelled, make us dinner before you go. I'm hungry. Even at that moment, all he cared about was food. I ignored him. Left the house with the investigation report in my bag. I went straight to Emma's house and explained what had happened. I can't believe they mocked me for your lover, Jack said, shaking his head. Their minds are delusional. I knew I had made the right choice by leaving Emma, and Jack promised to help me with the divorce proceedings. Just to be sure, I asked, are you sure it'll be okay with me living with you after you're married? Of course, Mom wanted you to live with us, Emma reassured. 3 weeks passed before Brian finally contacted me. Let's meet and discuss things at the house. Bring the divorce papers, he said. On the day of the meeting, I arrived with Emma, Jack, and our lawyer. Brian's face paled when he saw us. Why didn't you come alone? He stammered. You never said I had to come alone, I replied. House was a mess. Even after just 3 weeks, it was already filthy. Brian sneered. Even with all these people, you'll still pay alimony. I laughed. I've done nothing wrong here. Sign these. I handed him the divorce papers. Brian froze when he saw the documents. Why am I paying alimony? You're the one who cheated, he protested, showing the blurry photo. Again, our lawyer handed him the investigator's report. We have proof of your affair, he said firm. Brian's face turned ashen as he read the report. Jim too was speechless. I can't pay alimony. I'm broke. I borrowed money for the wedding and honeymoon, Brian admitted. Jim's true motives became clear. You're at remarrying, are you? I don't want to lose half of your inheritance. Brian looked defeated. I've already spent a lot of Mom's inheritance, he confessed. Jim collapsed in disbelief. Dad, can't you lend me some money? You've got some left, right? Brian begged Jim for help, but Jim had none to give. I reminded them both. Jim, I found debt collection notices in your room. At your age, asking your mom to clean your room is just embarrassing. Thalawir presented the alimony documents and Brian reluctantly signed them. Jacketed. I heard your mistress is spending your money and seeing other men. Brian turned white as a sheet, frantically had tried to call her, but she didn't pick up. Mary, I'm sorry, don't leave us. Jim begged. Dad's never home, and I'm tired of feeding junk food. I refused. Ask your father's new wife. You'll have a young housekeeper soon enough. We left them behind and headed straight to City Hall to file for divorce. Afterward, I moved in with Emma and Jack. It was a bit cramped, but we were planning to move to a bigger place soon. A few weeks later, I heard that Brian's mistress had scammed him. She had taken a large sum of money for a wedding that would never happen. He had been left with nothing but debt. Jim called me begging for help. Mom, Dad moved out, and I have nowhere to go. I'm not your mother. I reminded him we're not related, and I've divorced your father eventually. Jack threatened to report Jim to the police if he kept harassing. Method finally scared him off life with Emma, and Jack was peaceful. Soon we received wonderful news. Emma was pregnant. I was thrilled to become a grandmother and focused on preparing for her wedding, and our growing family life was finally looking up, and I was determined to cherish every moment with me loved ones.